The Haunting of Kichkandi. The old man sat in his rocking chair by the warm fire, the crackling flames casting flickering shadows on the walls of the small cottage. His grandchildren, gathered around him, looked up eagerly, their eyes wide with curiosity. They loved hearing their grandfather's stories, especially the ones about spirits and ghosts. "Ah, children," the old man began, his voice low and gravelly, "you've heard of the Kichkandi, haven't you?" The children nodded, though they had never truly understood the stories. They knew it was some kind of evil spirit from the old days, but the way the man spoke made them feel as though something more sinister lurked in the tale. "Well, let me tell you a story about how I encountered her," the old man continued, leaning forward, his gnarled hands trembling slightly as he spoke. "It was many, many years ago, when I was just a young boy, about your age. I lived in a small village, nestled in the misty hills, far from the towns. We didn't have electricity or fancy gadgets like you do now. At night, the only light came from the stars or a fire, and sometimes, if the wind was right, you could hear the call of an owl or wolf in the distance." The children leaned in, captivated by the grandfather's voice. "Now, this village had a legend," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper, "a legend of a woman named Maya. She was a kind soul, but her life was cursed. You see, Maya was in love with a young man from our village. They were set to marry, but one fateful night, on the eve of their wedding, he disappeared. Nobody knew where he went. No one ever saw him again. The villagers thought he had been taken by evil forces, or perhaps he had run away in fear of the commitment." The old man paused, looking out into the fire, as though the flames would reveal something long buried. "Maya, poor girl, she was heartbroken. She wandered the hills, searching for him. Days turned into weeks, but she couldn't find him. She went mad with grief. And then, in the woods, she met a dark sorcerer. He promised her he could bring her fiancé back, but at a terrible price." The children exchanged nervous glances, their hearts racing. "The sorcerer," the old man continued, his voice lowering even further, told Maya that to bring her love back, she would have to give up something of her own. But her desperation clouded her judgment. She agreed, and the sorcerer performed a dark ritual. Her fiancé returned, but he wasn't the man she knew. No, he was different. The grandfather's voice quivered, and the children instinctively huddled closer. Maya realized too late that the sorcerer's magic had twisted her love into something dark and soulless. She begged the sorcerer to undo the spell, but he only cursed her. He turned her into Kichkandi, a spirit doomed to wander the earth, seeking revenge on anyone who crossed her path. The room seemed to grow colder, and the grandfather's face grew solemn. "I heard the stories when I was a boy, of people who'd heard her wailing at night, crying out for help, only to be lured to their deaths. They say her voice sounds just like someone you know, maybe your mother or father, calling you out in the night. You think it's them, but when you approach, it's not." He leaned in closer, his voice barely a whisper now. "You see, children, Kichkandi is not just a story. I've seen her. One night, when I was about your age, I was curious. I didn't believe the stories. I thought the elders were just trying to scare us. So, I went to the old house where she's said to dwell, the one nobody dared enter. I stood there, outside the broken door, and I heard her voice, calling me by name." The children shuddered, eyes wide in fear. "Her voice sounded like my own mother, calling me out from the shadows," the old man said, his voice cracking slightly. "It was soft, sweet, and then, it became desperate. 'Help me,' she said, 'help me, please.' It was so real, I couldn't resist." He took a deep breath, as if recalling the terror of that night. "I stepped inside, the door creaking loudly behind me. The air inside was cold, like the breath of death itself. I followed the voice, getting closer and closer. But when I reached the room where I thought I'd find her, it was empty. There was nothing but darkness. And then, she appeared." The children clung to each other, their eyes wide in fear. "She was horrible. Her face was twisted, her eyes burning with rage, and her mouth, her mouth. It stretched so wide, and her scream was so loud, it seemed to tear through my soul. I couldn't move, I was frozen with fear. But somehow, I managed to turn and run. I don't know how I escaped, but I did." The old man paused for a moment, his voice softening. "To this day, I can still hear her voice sometimes, calling me from the shadows. I've lived a long life, but I know one thing for sure. Kichkandi is real. And anyone who dares to call out to her, or seek her in the night, will never come back." The children were silent, their eyes wide and filled with a mixture of awe and fear. "So, my little ones," the old man said with a small smile, "remember this story. Don't go wandering out in the woods at night. And never, ever answer a voice that calls you from the darkness. It might just be Kichkandi, waiting for you." The fire crackled, and the room grew quiet. The children huddled together, pondering the haunting tale their grandfather had shared, their hearts filled with both fear and wonder.